You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday the 2nd of October 2013. Bedroom tax breached human rights of disabled woman, judge rules. Derby Muslim free school Al-Madinah closes after inspection. Violent and sexual crimes rampant in UK. Golden Dawn and MSM View. Eurocrats squandered £2 billion on advertising. Brother of Irish nationalist leader Gerry Adams convicted of raping daughter. Iran lawmakers pass bill allowing men to marry adopted daughters. Caribbean states seek slavery reparations from Europe. Iceland to get its first mosque. Chemical weapons disarmament team in Damascus. Thought for the day, when is a pole not a pole? And finally, crocodile tears. UK news. Bedroom tax breached human rights of disabled woman, judge rules. Ruling in case of woman with MS who was penalised for not sharing room with husband could pave way for similar appeals. A tribunal judge in Glasgow has ruled that housing benefit officials breached the human rights of a severely disabled woman after docking her benefits under the bedroom tax. Judge Lindy Boyd said that the unnamed woman, who has multiple sclerosis, and her husband were legally entitled to a bedroom each because her condition was so severe she needed a specially adapted bed and bedroom. Opening the way for a series of other challenges, the judge said the woman's rights under the European Convention of Human Rights had been breached without justification, leaving her in rent arrears for 3 months. The ruling by a first-tier tribunal could yet be appealed by the Department of Work and Pensions. However, in March the DWP very quietly introduced an exemption for severely disabled children from the single-room subsidy rules after the Gorey decision. World at 8. We highlighted this case many months ago in World at 8 and I'm glad they're now doing the right thing. It's an imposition to dictate just how people should sleep and with whom, especially in the many cases like this. Derby Muslim free school Al-Madinah closes after inspection. The BBC reports a Muslim free school accused of imposing strict Islamic practices such as segregated classrooms has closed following an inspection by Ofsted. The BBC understands Ofsted's findings were so damning that the acting head of Al-Madinah in Derby had little choice but to shut it down immediately. The school said the move was due to a health and safety issue but expected it to reopen in the very near future. Ofsted said it could not disclose its concerns until the inspection ended. It added it had made some findings and shared them with the principal. The second day of the inspection is taking place later. In a statement on the school's website titled Short-Term Closure, interim principal Stuart Wilson said, "Owing to a health and safety issue, I've taken the decision to close the school until I'm confident that all children are safe on site." Free schools are state-funded but operate outside local education authority control and can be set up by parents and community groups in England. World at 8. Alias a haven for madrasa-type institutions to spring up and be funded by us idiots. Violent and sexual crimes rampant in UK. Latest figures from the Crime Survey for England and Wales estimate that there were 8.6 million crimes in England and Wales in the year ending March 2013. Total UK murder homicide rate in 2011-12 was 10.5, with 663 recorded victims. According to the Ministry of Justice, ONS and Home Office's first joint official statistics bulletin on sexual violence in January 2013, approximately 85,000 women are raped on average in England and Wales every year. Over 400,000 women are sexually assaulted each year, while 1 in 5 women aged 16 to 59 has experienced some form of sexual violence since the age of 16. Of the recorded offenders, 2,910 face court proceedings and only 1,070 are convicted of rape crime. Considering other types of crime such as burglary and robbery, Manchester is understood to be the most dangerous major city in England and Wales in the 2013 rankings. The UK Peace Index from the Institute for Economics and Peace also revealed that Glasgow in Scotland has the highest rate of homicides and violent crime in the UK. London and Belfast also come in second and third place. World at 8. Oh dear, I wonder why. Could it be that this country imports more foreign criminals than it does brain surgeons, and at the same time gives our peaceful citizens no means of defence other than a blinkered police force? European news. Golden Dawn, an MSM view. The BBC. Nicholas Mikaloliakos will be trying to convince the court he is just a proudly Nationalist Party leader, as Emily Thomas reports. Golden Dawn officially denies being a neo-Nazi movement despite its swastika-like insignia. This is the BBC for you. The Greek key has been prominent in Greek culture since before Christ, and any Greek should be offended by the BBC's inference that the Greek key is a swastika-like insignia. The Guardian. Golden Dawn arrests take Greece into uncharted waters. The crackdown on the far-right party will undoubtedly release new tensions onto an already poisoned political scene. Not since the return of democracy after the collapse of military rule in 1974 has a party been so publicly hounded. The arrests will undoubtedly unleash new tensions onto a political scene already poisoned by profound disillusionment with an establishment widely blamed for the financial mess that has led to the nation's economic and social meltdown. Reuters. Senior Golden Dawn lawmakers freed pending trial in Greece. 3 senior lawmakers from Greece's far-right Golden Dawn were freed on Wednesday pending trial on criminal charges, an unexpected setback to the government's efforts to clamp down on a party it has labelled a neo-Nazi criminal gang. The decision to free the men after a marathon 18-hour court session raised questions about how strong the state's case against Golden Dawn is after one of its sympathisers stabbed an anti-fascism rapper to death last month. Prime Minister Antonis Samaras' government has vowed to wipe out a party of Nazi descendants. It has shied away from trying to ban the party outright, but has ordered probes into them and plans to introduce laws against hate speech and deprive it of state funding to try to weaken the party. World at 8 comments. In short, all of which our governments did 5 years ago against the British National Party. It just comes down to state dictatorship and media bullying. Eurocrats squandered £2 billion on advertising. It pours £2 billion into advertising, more than Coca-Cola spent in 2008, according to the TaxPayers Alliance. And ferrying MPs and their offices between the European Parliament buildings in Strasbourg and Brussels costs another £150 million a year. Officials have frittered away pots of cash on other barmy projects, such as a £160,000 fitness centre for dogs that is still not open. Another £15 million has gone on a European Parliament visitor centre, which was £5 million over budget and 3 years late. Brother of Irish nationalist leader Gerry Adams convicted of raping daughter. The brother of Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams has been convicted of raping his daughter in a case that embarrassed the Irish nationalist political party. A Belfast jury found Liam Adams guilty Tuesday on 10 counts of raping and sexually assaulting his daughter Aine from 1977 to 1983, when she was 4 to 9 years old. World at 8 states. Disgusting, but hardly down to political leanings. But if this was a follower of Islam, it would never have reached court. I hope he gets a strong sentence. If he'd been my husband, he wouldn't have reached court either, but for a very different reason. World news. Iran lawmakers pass bill allowing men to marry adopted daughters. Human rights activists say approved bill making girls vulnerable to the ruling from age 13 legalises paedophilia. Parliamentarians in Iran have passed a bill to protect the rights of children, which includes a clause that allows a man to marry his adopted daughter, and while she is as young as 13 years. Activists have expressed alarm that the bill, approved by Parliament on Sunday, opens the door for the caretaker of a family to marry his or her adopted child if a court rules it's in the interests of the individual child. Iran's Guardian Council, a body of clerics and jurists which vets all parliamentary bills before the constitution and the Islamic law, has yet to issue its verdict on the controversial legislation. To the dismay of rights campaigners, girls in the Islamic Republic can marry as young as 13, provided they have the permission of their father. In Iran, a girl under the age of 13 can still marry, but needs the permission of a judge. At present, however, marrying stepchildren is forbidden under any circumstances. World at 8 comments, oh boy, they're finding ways of legalising underage rape to include females not born into the family. What next? Caribbean states seek slavery reparations from Europe. 14 Caribbean nations are seeking reparations from Britain, France and the Netherlands for over 400 years of slavery brought to their islands by the former colonial powers. Caribbean leaders make their case at United Nations General Assembly last week. The awful legacy of these crimes against humanity ought to be repaired for the developmental benefit of our Caribbean societies and all our peoples. The European nations must partner in a focused special way with us to execute this repairing, said the Prime Minister of St Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves. Gonsalves is spearheading the effort on behalf of the Caribbean Community, a regional organisation which focuses on economic integration. CARICOM has now hired a British human rights firm, Lee Day, to prepare the legal challenge with the International Court of Justice based in The Hague. Lee Day has already successfully fought for compensation for hundreds of Kenyans tortured by the British in the so-called Mau Mau Rebellion in 1952 to 1960. Some of the 14 nations, such as Jamaica and Antigua Barbuda, have already tried to seek compensation on their own. But earlier this year, all 14 CARICOM nations decided to back a joint effort and focus on Britain, France and the Netherlands to pay for their role in the Atlantic slave trade. A compensation figure has not been floated yet, but it could be to the tune of several $100 billion. Vereen Shepherd, chairman of the National Reparations Commission in Jamaica, said that when Britain allowed slaves to be free in 1834, British settlers were compensated with the equivalent of €240 billion. World at 8 states, bunkum. These people would have to trace their ancestry back to actual slaves for a start, which would prove impossible in most cases, and then sue the Arab world for selling them in the first place. Just because you're black, it doesn't mean your ancestor was a slave. This needs throwing out with the baby and the bathwater. My ancestor might have been taken into slavery by Arabs. How does that go? Been a slave building the pyramids. How's that for compensation? Thousands of years, isn't it? My great-grandfather owned slaves in Kingston, Jamaica. Get over it. Iceland to get its first mosque. The Reykjavik City Council has approved a building permit for the construction of its first mosque in Iceland. The mosque will be built in Sogamri, an upscale district near downtown Reykjavik, on a highly desirable plot of land that was granted to Muslims free of charge, courtesy of Icelandic taxpayers. Members of the City Council, which is led by Reykjavik Mayor John Gar, who identifies himself as an anarchist, say they hope the prime location will make the mosque a prominent landmark in the city. Critics of the mosque, however, say the project is being financed by donors in the Middle East who are seeking to exert control over and radicalise the growing Muslim community in Iceland. World at 8 comments. Well, they can build one, but I would suggest under the ice. Now that wouldn't be too much of an eyesore, would it? Chemical weapons disarmament team in Damascus. A disarmament team is scheduled to arrive in Damascus Wednesday 2nd of October 2013, tasked with destroying Syria's chemical arsenal. The team of 20 inspectors from the Hague-based Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons is implementing a United Nations resolution passed last week that ordered the elimination of Syria's chemical arms. The operation to rid Syria of chemical weapons by a target date of mid-2014 will be one of the largest and most dangerous of its kind. The arsenal is believed to include more than 1,000 tonnes of sarin, mustard gas and other banned chemicals stored at an estimated 45 sites across the war-torn country. The OPCW team arrived in Beirut on Monday before it crossed into Syria. World at 8 states. The media is very spare with the truth over whose chemical weapons it will dismantle. There are many factions in Syria and all probably have chemical weapons of one sort or another. The UN might not even tackle the so-called rebels' arsenal at all. Thought for the day. When is a Pole not a Pole? Well, of course the answer to that is when he's in the UK. There's a high amount of emotion involved when talking about the influx of mainly Polish people into this country, which has been taking place over the last 10 years, amply encouraged by our liberal lovies and often childless working couples who wouldn't appear to function without the ubiquitous Polish cleaner. These opinions differ vastly from one end of our country to the other. Those in the north usually welcome the Poles. After all, they are a direct opposite to the Muslim immigrants who have had the monopoly in certain regions by virtue of their sheer numbers over the last 40 odd years, and we have to admit that the Poles are usually both white and Christian and prepared to work, unlike many of their Eastern European and Muslim counterparts. Down in the south of the country it is a very different matter. From Oxford down to Kent and along the southern coastline, a vast majority of people are very unhappy bunnies indeed over the Polish influx, and they have very good reasons to be so. I know from personal experience in my family that when my youngest son left uni and had to work in that area for a year because his girlfriend at the time still had a year to go, he applied for blue-collar jobs despite a BA because he knew that he wouldn't be staying up in Banbury. All the local agencies at that time were promoting Polish workers to come into the country on the promise that there were jobs for them and cheap or free housing, and there was. But there were no jobs for young English men. These agencies even had houses to rent out solely to Poles, and the jobs advertised on their books were earmarked for Poles. Of course it was an employer's dream, a cheap available source of workers, most of whom were overeducated but grateful to be housed and fed. It drove down the wage and put local workers out of work and had a terrible effect on the social housing cohesion down south, whereby first on the housing lists are now the Poles, with the Nepalese taking second place and any immigrant, Tom, Dick or Harry, taking up the rear. Down here, apart from the awful Nepalese restaurants and takeaways, we have Polish shops, and in certain places around the West Sussex coast we have Polish towns, and one of our councillors had a bit of a turn up at the conference last weekend. John is from around Bognor Regis, that once very English middle-class Blackpool of the south, and being on the council is right up front and personal with the problems that the Poles have brought to his region. In his words, he was gobsmacked when during the evening entertainment, which was good fun, we had two young Polish lads stand up and sing to us. I should have taken a picky of John's face. It was an absolute study. Of course it would have helped if we could have understood what they were singing about, but it was apparently a Polish nationalist song, and these two guys were part of the young Polish nationalist movement. Well, it moved our John, to say the least. In his words, I'm trying to get various people onto housing lists headed by Polish families, and worse, and there we are, being sung to 'em by 'em. I can understand his reasoning, but we all have to understand that the Polish nationalists want their fellow countrymen to go home and support Poland, which is now suffering from a loss of workers and a downgrade in population. Much like Nepal, they are all over here. Of course it doesn't help the situation when the silly British governments pay child allowance to Polish parents when their kids are over in Poland. That does nothing to encourage going back home, does it? Then joy. When returning from shopping yesterday, we bumped into a nice young couple opening one of the garages in the garage block. We got to talking and he was very, very talkative and very Polish, as was his wife. They're renting privately one of the smaller houses near us that was sold recently. They're paying around $7.50 per month, and although he is highly qualified with a degree and 5 languages, he's working in the care industry locally. He told me something that I was surprised to learn, that the European Union had decimated his country financially when they joined the EU and adopted the euro. He said everything went up overnight, but salaries didn't. He gave an example of a bag of onions. They were originally 35 pennies and rose to €1.45, and that is the reason why there's so many Poles in the UK. Many are overqualified, but they don't make enough doing those jobs in Poland as they do over here. And if we're honest, our greedy employers and agencies have capitalised on this problem, not just for the Poles, but other peoples in the EU financial setup. It stands to reason if a large quantity of people from countries within the European Union who have adopted the euro cannot live in those countries anymore and have come to a country which hasn't, thankfully, adopted the euro, that something is very wrong with the European system of currency. You look at the countries which are going slowly down the pan in Europe: Spain, Greece, Italy, Southern Ireland and more. The sad fact is the EU has created more immigration problems and more financial problems than any other united organisation before in history. The EU was formed for Germany, and as of this moment Germany is the only one with a trade surplus. So the conditions of the EU axis of evil promote a wandering, cheap working force of people who go from country to country, bleed it dry and move on. Rather like locusts, only not so pretty. After all, when a grasshopper swarms, it becomes a locust, and I believe the similarity between the majority of all our immigrants is just that. Strip and move on, or unfortunately, in some cases in the UK, stay and breed and let the Brits move on. When they show programmes on TV about immigration, cheap workers or social housing, they always highlight the Brits, but occasionally they get hold of the Poles, and coming to an area near you next year, the Romanians and the Bulgarians. Our media is effectively warning the vast bulk of non-Christian immigrants that they have competition, and boy they know it. Nothing is quite so anti-Polish as the Muslims. They failed in the 13th century to conquer Poland, and old enmities die hard. In some areas in the north the Poles are actually outbreeding Muslims, and you'll hear gripes of wrath from many of the Islamic communities up there that they don't want any more Poles or Eastern Europeans. Of course they don't, but by the same rule we Brits don't want any more Muslims or other immigrants. But we are still members of the EU, and the Schengen Treaty means that although we have not adopted the euro coin, we are still obliged to take peoples from any part of a country which is part of the EU. Whereas I don't recall any agreement by us Brits to be forced to take any people from the following countries: India, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Malaya, Indonesia, Africa and the sub-Saharan regions, Saudi Arabia, South America, Russia, the Philippines, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Nepal, non-Gurkhas, and many, many more, who have all landed on our shores mostly illegally and are costing us a small fortune every day in benefits and our public services. Talking of benefits, how will this new work for your benefit business apply to Chowdhury, he of the qualified law degree who refuses to work and has state benefits? Will this law, if passed, apply to the large enclave of Muslims who are happy to take taxpayers' money and not work? Will it apply to the Eastern Europeans, some of whom don't work? Or will it just apply to Tom, Dick and Harry? If so, I can see that the Polish communities will take the brunt of the trouble here, as no one in the UK is up to tackling the Islamic communities on any serious points of order. So we have a dichotomy here, a north-south divide, and it's sad that down south we do have vast amounts of Poles who do take houses from indigenous Brits and jobs. The myth about the lazy Brit worker is well worn and in many cases simply not true. It would be just nice to be considered for a job for many. I would rather have a Pole than a Muslim, but this is a personal choice. I would in truth have very little of either, but a small amount of both makes for a smaller cosmopolitan society which I grew up in through the 50s and 60s. But we will all have to face a choice one day of where our loyalties lie, and in truth mine lie with England. We will have to leave the EU, although it will not be an easy move, and we will have to shut our borders down one day and start deporting the illegal immigrants and criminals. This is not fascism in its purest form, it is self-preservation, and whether it be Poles or Somalis, they will all be advised that to return home and support their countries with their skills is preferable to living in a benefit-free UK and within a country which hopefully will find and adhere to its true culture, religions and history. We will have to stop being the fund holder of the world for migrants and start looking after and thinking of our own tribes. Most if not all these people, whether from the EU or from the world, should be back working and putting expertise into their own cultures and history, if only for the sake of their children. And of course, ours. And finally, talk about crocodile tears. Shunning the conventional choice of a cat or dog, retired prison officer Chris Weller has spent £25,000 converting his home into a crocodile-friendly habitat for his pet. His detached bungalow in suburban Kent features a large cat flap through to a conservatory with built-in pond to cater for 7-year-old Caesar, a spectacled caiman. Caesar, who was only a foot long when Mr. Weller bought him, lives on a diet of raw salmon and steak and is prevented from escaping into the outside world by a 3-door lock system. He said his 40 years of service at HMP Rochester had been good practice for caring for his unusual pet, saying, "I spent 4 decades keeping dangerous animals behind locks and gates, so it's no different here. As he's grown up, he's used to the safety systems, and I never have any concerns about going to bed and him waking up next to me." Mr. Weller moved into the loft of his home to allow Caesar, who is 5'6" and still growing, to roam around. He said He's my closest companion and most of my day revolves around feeding, cleaning and entertaining him. Most people are terrified when they find out I live with a crocodile, but I've raised him since he was a baby and now he's completely docile. The pair spend their days reading books, watching TV and listening to their favourite radio station, Classic FM, whilst Mr Weller tends to his other animals, including terrapin turtles, parrots and lizards. Mr Weller said as he's got older he's become happier to be around me and he likes nothing more than watching TV and listening to the radio. Caimans can grow up to 7 foot long and live for 40 years. This presenter says that Caesar is a very handsome reptile and certainly far better looking than the majority of the humans that Mr Weller has been looking after. And also much gentler, I would imagine. Good luck, Chris. To each his own, I say. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozar and I wish you all a very good night.